everyone. Good morning. So, what is the future of education? As we move towards an exponentially AI-driven future faced by critical challenges like climate change, I think this is a question on so many people's minds. And I'm so excited to be reimagining high school and literally the global future of education with this incredible entrepreneur, global thought leader, futurist, award-winning educator, Raya Bidshahri. Welcome, Raya. Happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So everyone, Raya is the founder of an incredible school with an equally incredible name called the School of Humanity. The School of Humanity is an award-winning online high school. It's licensed in the United States and it's accredited by the Western Associations of Schools and Universities. Raya has been a keynote speaker since she was 16 years old. She's spoken at 60 conferences on education across the world. She's featured by the BBC as one of the most influential and inspiring women globally. Thank you. So, what inspired you to reimagine education? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Absolutely. So for me, my journey very much began as a student. So growing up, I actually never thought I would go into education. I was on the path to become a scientist. That's what I thought I wanted to do. And like many young minds today, I just started getting more and more frustrated with the emphasis on rote memorization for exams and kind of the process of memorizing information, taking a test, forgetting it. And throughout my journey in high school, I was also lucky to start having entrepreneurial experiences very early on. So I started learning by doing, attending conferences, working on non-for-profit, social impact projects. And I learned so much through literally having an impact on the world and solving real-world issues. And those two experiences were at such contradiction with one another. What I was learning in schools and the process in the formal education system compared to the real-world experiences I was having just felt like such a confusing contradiction. And this painful contradiction continued throughout university while I was doing my degree in neuroscience. That's my academic background. Once again, I found that I was in big lecture halls, listening to lectures, memorizing textbooks, taking tests. And it actually wasn't until I started working in a lab on my own, volunteering in a research center that I understood, oh, this is what it's like to actually do science, like practically conduct experiments and ask questions and find the answers to them. And even at that level, there was a massive contradiction between what it felt or meant to work in the industry versus what we learned in the classroom. And all of this combined with, challenges my peers and I were having with our mental health and making sense of the state of the education system ultimately inspired me to pivot into education. So I graduated early and I then pivoted into starting an educational organization and first tried to tackle it through an extracurricular lens by working with schools, and that was meaningful in its own way, but ultimately found that the real impact comes from creating a new education system and a new model of schooling, and that's what I'm working on now.
Yes. I think what you're referring to was the Academy that you were doing. So she had this incredible platform called the Academy, which was happening through COVID, where kids could, have these sort of real world problems that they could deal with online. And I think that's when I spoke to you. And she said to me, Karishma, education needs to be an awe-inspiring experience. I remember that. And that's so true because we follow such a rigid model of education. We follow a capped model of education, right? There is a finite number, so you can get 100%, which everyone is just dying to get, especially at high school level, right? And then you've got a finite number of answers as well, because why are you giving exams? The exams require answers. But when you enter the real world, you realize that the biggest businesses were created to give solutions, like Uber and stuff. So we're not actually learning to find solutions. We're learning to give answers. And how do you do that with the School of Humanity?
Yeah, so it all comes back to creating open-ended experiences. And this is actually something we try to detox out of our incoming learners. They often say, okay, Miss, what's the correct answer? And I say there actually isn't one in a lot of the cases that we deal with. So a little bit of background about the model and curriculum. So we're an online high school. We serve learners from 26 countries across 5 continents. And it's a blend of various progressive learning models. One of the core elements of it is it's challenge-based learning. So every term, our learners, instead of choosing courses, choose challenges. So this term, they're choosing between understanding minds and future of the internet. Next term, they're going to be doing food, energy, water security, and activism through arts. And the following term, we're looking at maintaining global peace and so forth. So over the course of a challenge, in the first half of the challenge, our educators are guiding them through an interdisciplinary investigation of the challenge. So for example, in the Protecting Our Oceans challenge, we still learn chemistry by looking at ocean acidification. We learn biology by looking at the ecosystems in the ocean. We learn history by looking at how human societies and civilizations formed near the ocean. So it's interdisciplinary rather than siloed. And then in the second half of the term, to kind of bring it back to your question, learners then get to choose sub-challenges, problems in this grander challenge, and they then act on it. So they can develop entrepreneurial, technological, artistic, scientific solutions to that challenge. They might do a deeper investigation of one of the sub-challenges, and it's much more open-ended. This is the part of the curriculum where they literally design their own projects, their own assessments, and it's very open-ended in the sense that it really comes down to the learner's level and the learner's interests. And I think every curriculum, every school should have the space for that kind of open-ended learning, because as you mentioned, the challenges of our world are open-ended. They're interdisciplinary. They require a systems thinking perspective. They require a creative thinking perspective. It's rarely the kind of ways of thinking that our traditional exam-based system assumes.
And you teach systems thinking? I mean, I don't even know what that means. Can you please break that down?
So systems thinking is the skill of literally thinking in systems. So for example, and this is one of my favorite examples, and I'd love to see if you guys can guess what the situation was. So a few years ago in India, they suddenly had a huge influx of infectious diseases. I think 100,000 people died. And it was linked to an introduction of an antibiotic for cows. Can anyone figure out where the link came from? Any guesses? How did the introduction of this antibiotic in cows lead to death of 100,000 people? Any guesses? Yeah. Okay. Can you take it a step forward? How did that get to humans?
Through the meat.
Through the meat. So that's a common misconception, is the first thing we think we ate the animals and that happened. Actually, what happened was linked to another species, the vultures. So it turns out in India, they would often leave carcasses of animals for the vultures to feed on. And the vultures were consuming this new medicine that was being introduced to cows, and they were dying in incredible numbers. And what that meant is that the carcasses of the cows were then led to rot and would end up producing transmissible diseases, and the rise of infectious diseases went up. So you need systems thinking to be able to understand how all these things connect with one another. So that's literally the skill of being able to map political systems, medical systems, societal systems, systems in nature, and actually connect them all together, which is the interconnectedness that we have in our world. So that is a skill of systems thinking. It is one of the credit areas in our core curriculum, and it's embedded throughout the 4 years of the journey.
Wow.
Yeah.
You talked about, the incredible educators you have that do this. We also know that we do have sort of a looming sort of crisis in education. I think there was a UNESCO Global World Report that documented there is going to be a dearth of 44 million teachers by 2030.
Yeah.
There's an attrition rate of 50% post-COVID. So if you actually compound that, that's 88 million. How do we find educators that are passionate enough, that are invested enough, that aren't burnt out enough to even start thinking about things like this? And then students and parents, obviously, to complete that ecosystem.
Yeah, it requires a systemic redesign to even do that to begin with. So, I mean, how many of us have met children or teenagers that say, I want to be teachers when I grow up? It's actually so rare. Even when I look at our own school, we have a few who say, oh, I'd love to do this, but it's really rare. They want to be doctors and lawyers and engineers and astronauts. And I think it actually starts with reimagining the role of the educator at a systems level. So Finland is an excellent case study of this. They, famously required advanced degrees for their educators. They compensate their educators really well. It's perceived to be a prestigious role to have in society. And as a result, people aspire to be educators. But part of the issue as well is just the way that the role of the teacher is designed to require so much hypervigilance throughout the day. The UAE is actually decent at this, but in the United States, you have educators that are in the classroom teaching at least 6 hours a day. And then you add to that the time that they have to do prep and grading and curriculum design. And it's just this, from a structural perspective, it's designed to lead to burnout. And unless we design a system to reduce the number of hours in the classroom, leave more prep time, introduce things like 4-day weeks, introduce things like flexibility for when you can take time off, compensate them better, I don't think it's fair to then expect educators to aspire to stay in the industry. And there's a running joke in the US that they can make more money being bartenders than they can being teachers. So there's actually a massive exodus of teachers that go on to be bartenders. And so you have to just change the incentives around the role if you want people to, talented human beings to want to do the role.
Right. I'm going to take the next few questions step by step, because I think what I want to tackle here, there's a lot of parents here and there's a lot of educators here. When you have open-ended solutions like you do, obviously we need to be able to quantify outcomes, because at the end of the day, our children have to go to university, right? So you need a report card, or you need something that they can give to say, this is what I've done. So if they're not IB grades and they're not points and they're not A stars, which is exhausting, I'm going through it right now and it's just soul crushing. What is the alternative? How do you do it? Because if you want to make fundamental change, it's going to have to happen at university level.
Yeah.
And honestly, we don't even know when that whole machine is so intricate, that would take ages. So how would someone like you grade your students and make sure that they can go to the universities that they desire to go to?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there, and maybe we'll take a step back and say we should be quantifying learning. I actually truly believe that, because how do we know if learning has happened?
Right.
So if we take a step back, and a lot of educators know about the concept of assessment for learning, really at its purest form, assessments are to ask the question, has learning happened, and how do we know, right? That's just purely the purpose of what an assessment should be. So with that in mind, we do assess learning throughout our journey at our school. What we don't do are closed book, paper-bound, time-bound exams. So all our assessments are project-based. There are rubrics affiliated with those projects that are linked to our core curriculum and standards that we want to align by. Learners do these projects to evidence their different skills, learning, knowledge acquisition, and so forth. And part of it is also they can retake it as many times as they want. So if they try the project, didn't do really well, they get feedback, they can even try that or get an opportunity to evidence that learning later somewhere else in the curriculum. So it's much more cyclical. It's, okay, I haven't met these outcomes, but I met that one, and let's move on with that. Now, coming to the university question, one of the best advice I received from another education entrepreneur who's actually doing what we're doing at a university level, there's lots of innovative universities, by the way, emerging, said, look, the school itself, the model can be as innovative as you'd like, but the packaging needs to feel traditional. So what they had done at their university is they were doing project-based interdisciplinary courses, but their students still had GPAs. They would graduate with a transcript showing the coursework and a GPA that came from the project-based assessments. So we actually took a very similar approach. We still have transcripts, GPAs, while learners can work cumulatively, improve their GPA, they still have to get that transcript. And because we've benchmarked the curriculum to recognize standards, we can then show equivalency for governments and ministries that need to see equivalency reports as well. And so that helps check off that box. But longer term, there's some innovative solutions coming up. So there is this concept of a mastery transcript that's already gaining a lot of momentum in US, Canada, and Australia. It's the idea of a portfolio-based transcript where you don't show a GPA, you show a portfolio of projects linked to credit areas that have been mastered at a foundational or advanced levels. And already over 300 universities in the United States accept the mastery transcript as an alternative to the GPA transcript. And that's a common misconception. And last thing I'll say say here is around the universities. So it's true in some countries, especially UK, Europe, there is still a huge push and often regulatory requirement to have qualifications like AP, A-levels, IB. The US has been pretty test optional for a really long time. There are some universities that still require the SATs, but a lot of people don't realize the APs are completely optional for US universities.
I didn't know.
Most high schools within the US actually don't offer the APs. A subsection of them do. All of them, will offer SAT tests, exams, and so on. But many universities in the US are happy to just look at your school transcript and might ask for the SATs and your overall kind of accomplishments and go with that. So for families that never want to do an exam, that say, you know what, my child just does not test well, they're not motivated by it, there is this alternative pathway that exists, that has been around. And schools like ours aren't new. There's lots of project-based schools, mastery-based schools, interdisciplinary schools in the US that have been around for decades. And universities in the US especially are familiar with how to assess those learners. Just a final stat to wrap it up, around 1.6% of students in the US are already in alternative schools, and then an additional, I think 3% are being homeschooled. So there's this millions of students that are outside of the schooling system that are getting a very different kind of education. So universities understand that, and they're already ready to admit those learners.
So would your graduates have to do SATs though? Do they do them?
Depends on where they want to study. Okay. So we have learners from around the world and they're interested in a variety of pathways. We have about 60% of them never want to do any exams. So families come to us because they want to learn in a different way, and many of them are interested in universities that kind of continue learning and offering this kind of learning model. So they'll go on to those universities or they'll go on to test optional universities. About 40% of them do want to keep the traditional pathways open. Of that batch, some will do the SATs and some will do the APs. We benchmark our advanced credits against the AP exams, which are kind of a hack for them, for learners going to UK or Europe that need to have 2 or 3 APs to show a qualification.
Right. Now, you're saying universities are sort of disrupting. And I went to this incredible roundtable that I was telling you last week on the future of education, and there's so many incredible minds that are doing so many incredible things in the field of sort of disrupting education. We are in a lovely progressive school with parents, that have such an open and progressive thinking here. But in general, parental mindset, because all we know is what we've been through, and at the end of the day, we don't want to make any mistakes, and we don't want to ever, take ownership for, oh my God, because I did that, my child didn't get to do what he wanted to do. So how do you disrupt a parent's mindset,
Yeah. It's a great question. And to be honest, very early on, we said we weren't in the business of convincing parents. And what I mean by that is what we saw is that there's a subsection of parents, and maybe we can call them early adopter parents to use the kind of startup terminology, that were, for them, staying in the traditional system for their kids was not a choice anymore. Either they had special learning differences that were completely not catered to, or they were deeply stressed and anxious. We had learners coming in with deep anxieties from just what they had been through in the system, or philosophically, they're artistic, they're entrepreneurial, they're forward-looking, and they just do not believe in the status quo. And what we found is there's actually plenty of those parents out there, and even if they're 0.5% of the population, because the education system's so big and everyone needs a schooling system, there's plenty to start working with. So as an organization, we decided early on we were going to focus on just reaching those parents, those challenger parents, we called them, who understood that, for their specific children, and there's no single one-size-fits-all for all learners, there was something different that was needed. Longer term, I think what will happen, understandably so, is as schools like ours start to show years and years of successes, and alumni go on to universities, they go on to start companies, they go on to different career pathways, and regulatory bodies start to recognize diplomas from schools like ours equally, and that takes time. Then I think more and more families will start to feel assured for wanting those extra stamps of approval. So I think that's probably the trajectory that's going to take over the long term.
Right.
Yeah.
And, there's been a lot of talk recently, rightly so, about children and their online habits and social media and the influence of tech. Now, you are an online school and you are an online high school. how do students build interpersonal skills, relationships, in this online sort of interpersonal, online setting?
Yeah, so there's layers to it. One is, I would never argue that online substitutes in person, and the families that online schooling or even homeschooling works really well for is they put intentional planning around, okay, how do we make sure then there is that in-person community around that? And one model that has worked really well is we have a partnership with a Teens Hub in Dubai called Teenovation. They started as a homeschooling community, and they're a group of I think they've got up to 100 learners now, and they do excursions, events, workshops, and we have a partnership with them where our students that are enrolled with us in the UAE online are also enrolled with Teenovation. So they have an amazing social life in person. They're often very busy actually, and they have their schooling come from online. So we have this misconception that school is the only place where in-person socialization can happen. And what models like this show is that you could actually uncouple it in that you can have a schooling solution and a in socialization solution. But beyond that, even online learning can be very social. So the way our schedule is structured is we only have 3 to 4 hours of workshops a day, 4 days a week. And those workshops are not lectures. They're highly interactive. We do lots of debates, escape rooms, discussions, and lots of interaction happening throughout the sessions. This allows learners to make friends from around the world, to collaborate, and to develop kind of social skills in that setting as well. And then the last nuance I'd add to this is, just because learners are in-person school together doesn't mean they're having meaningful social lives. A lot of learners that have come up to us because they were bullied, because again, if they had SLDs, that meant they were very overwhelmed in a school building with thousands of students, and actually being able to create that distance allowed them to then formulate more curated and meaningful social lives that worked well for them. Yeah.
And now we have something called ChatGPT, right? Which I have to literally make sure that I'm not subscribed to for my children. How do you sort of control the use of that when they're sort of writing your assessments, and also just the exercise of writing and putting pen on paper? Is this how would you cultivate that? Because that is something that we know cognitively is so intrinsic, right?
Yeah. So when ChatGPT at first came out, obviously we all started seeing essays suddenly be very polished. But one of the first things that we did was organize a focus group and involve the learners in the setting of the policy. So we set a policy around it very early on, and we said we're not going to ban it. There are situations where we would encourage the use of ChatGPT. So whether it's using it as a tutor, using it to structure your project, using it to create outlines for different assignments, basically using it as a support assistant for your learning, because it is a really powerful resource if utilized well. And then there are situations where we all agreed as a school that is plagiarism to use ChatGPT, using it to falsify your abilities, using it to generate work to pretend like it's your own, and so on. And I think human instinct has been pretty good at spotting it so far. I know there's a lot of ChatGPT detectors, but they generate a lot of false positives. They're not very accurate. But an educator can usually tell, and we've had instances, obviously, of the use and of ways of dealing with it. But I think what's even more important is for us as a school and as a society to then look at our curriculum and say, how do we AI-proof the skills that we're focusing on? Because, the future, there was a quote, I think, by Jack Ma, that your job isn't going to be taken away by AI. It's going to be taken away by someone who knows how to use AI really well. Right. And so it is an important skill to then learn to develop, but also it puts even more emphasis on the human skills that can't be automated anytime soon, that we absolutely should be focusing on in the curriculum, because those are then the things that the workforce will prioritize.
I think you have a module, right, on responsible use of AI. What does that mean? What do you do?
Yeah, one of our most popular challenges is ethical AI, and we put a lot of emphasis in the curriculum around technology ethics in general, because we're seeing the rise of really powerful technologies, whether it's biotechnology to genetically engineer life forms, or whether it's artificial intelligence. It's understanding ethical philosophy, morality, values, and applying them to these moral dilemmas that are emerging as a result of the use of these technologies. But we also have a part of the curriculum called the Human Flourishing Curriculum. This is completely focused.
It's lovely.
It's completely focused on the soft skills, on emotional intelligence, how to overcome your ego and collaborate, leadership, collaboration, how to find purpose, how to cope with stress and anxiety, how to be mindful. And I think that part of the curriculum is now even more important in the age of AI. It's those human skills that we're going to rely on even more than we used to.
Right. And then we've got another big challenge, which is climate change. And I saw that this year, your curriculum is fully centered around sort of a sustainability approach. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, for our grade 11. So we started the school with our 9th graders. We then had 10th graders last year. We have a batch that's moved on to 11th grade, and there are advanced learners now. They're in their final 2 years of high school. So we had to ask ourselves, how do we challenge them? They've been doing this kind of learning for 2 years now, and they've really mastered a lot of these incredible skills. So this year, from advanced level onwards or grade 11 onwards, they're doing year-long challenges. So they're spending a whole year tackling a challenge, and they all voted to, because it's a small batch for the first group, so they all voted on a single challenge, which was building sustainable futures. So the entire curriculum now for the grade 11s is focused on sustainable ecosystems, donut economics, circular economy, like all those concepts from various disciplines to come back to sustainability. And that is combined with other parts of the curriculum that focus on other things. So they're still doing project-based units to develop their math skills or quantitative skills and a variety of other skills. But the challenge part of the curriculum is going to be focused on building sustainable futures. I think we all know that we're kind of going through increasing climate emergencies. I think the floods in Dubai last year were living proof of what's going to be more and more common. And one of the levels at which we can try to tackle this global issue is through our education system and developing green literacies into future leaders so that they can then go onto the world prepared to tackle this issue.
Sorry, this might seem like a stupid question, but you have these incredible modules in year 11 and year 12. So basically, your sciences integrate into these models. Your languages integrate into these models. Like, would you have English, Spanish, French? How does it work?
Yeah.
It's just
it's
fascinating.
It's a bit of both. So we felt like it was important to have a balance of open-ended and structured. And believe me, some learners really struggle with open-endedness and they need like scaffolding. And any educator will tell you this. And we felt like there was an important balance to be had between breadth and depth. So the challenges are breadth, they're interdisciplinary, you kind of touch on different disciplines. And the point is to focus on the synthesis and the connection between all these different bodies of knowledge. Whereas our skill units focus on depth. They allow you to go deeper into different parts of the curriculum, whether it's the languages or the sciences or the humanities and so on. And they're still project-based. So for example, our advanced biology curriculum is broken down into multiple projects. And one of the projects, they're analyzing an endangered ecosystem and applying concepts of ecosystems to understand what's happening and population analysis and so on and so on. And one of the other projects, they're actually looking at biotech and genetics by looking at science fiction and understanding how some of the genetic engineering you see in science fiction could become possible and applying concepts of genetics to it. So they're still doing these projects, but in the units, they can go deeper into different parts of the curriculum. I will also add that the world needs both. You need humans that are those generalists that are able to make those connections, and then you need humans that are specialists. And we already see learners show kind of preferences towards one or the other, or sometimes in the middle.
Yeah. And we know what the limitations are with mainstream education. What do you think the limitations are with models like yours? Of course, they still need to become mainstream. That's separate.
Yeah.
Besides that,
one of the biggest challenges is scalability. Because the model, again, open-endedness, project-based, and the personalized element means that it's significantly more admin for our educators. And I can speak to how we've structured their time to lighten the workload. But grading project-based assessments is significantly more time per assessment than if you were just like marking a quiz, which could be automated right now easily. At the same time, the personalized approach and coaching required is also more time. So, and obviously at scale, you then I'm sure there would be challenges with quality. It's significantly more difficult to standardize by in nature of the fact that you don't want to standardize it. So I think that's a big question facing the industry with models like ours. I do think the technology is getting there to serve as a digital backbone to quality assure these things at scale. But that's one big challenge. Obviously, the other aspect of it is the online element is not for everyone at the moment, and we recognize that. Our vision in the long term is to be hybrid and partner more and more with in-person schools that want to offer what we're doing. But I think
regulations, government regulations, school regulations.
Yeah, that is a challenge in some places more than others. So truth be told, if you wanted to run a school like ours, truly progressive and exactly the same shape and form in UAE, I don't think that would be I don't think we'd be able to at this point in time, although KSHE has been widely supportive and they've been having meetings with us. They're very curious to kind of push those boundaries in the near future. But in many countries like the United States, there's just so much freedom to innovate, and that's why you have so many interesting models of education like microschooling and project-based schools, mixed age group schools emerging in those countries. So in the short term, I think there are enough countries with open regulations that education entrepreneurs can choose their jurisdictions carefully about where they launch schools like ours.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, last two questions. Raya gives speeches on what schools look like in Mars. Can you please explain, how do you even envision something like that?
So specifically, what I often get asked to talk about is what would the schools of the future look like? So I recently was speaking about, okay, let's imagine it's the year 2100, and what would our education system need to look like in that year? In order to answer that question, we have to ask what would the world look like in 2100, and especially with the rise of certain technologies and mega trends. And it's been predicted that the current middle schoolers are the Mars generation. Their generation would be the first people to step foot on Mars. And then, they would grow up to set the first settlements on Mars. So this raised a provocative question of, okay, how do we prepare this generation for life on Mars? Like, what are the skills that we need to equip them with to become an interplanetary species? That just raises completely different questions around how we structure our curriculum. And then B, if we were to set up a school on Mars in the next 100 to 200 years, what would that school need to look like in terms of curriculum, mindsets to prepare the astronauts of the future? So, to be honest, you still come back to the curriculum we have today around the balance of the human skills and the technology skills and the systems thinking skills to kind of form the challenges of the next generation. But I think it's less about what the answer to the question is than more asking that question, because our children and grandchildren, whether we like it or not, are going to be coping with these questions. So I think being able to zoom out and take a look far into the future is something we don't do enough in our education system. And I'm hoping to push those boundaries a little bit.
And will the schools on Earth kind of be the same as the one on Mars in 2100?
I hope so.
Will there be an Earth?
I hope so. I think I'm a techno-optimist. I'm also a huge advocate for space exploration. I don't think it needs to come at a cost to our planet. If we wanted to make budget cuts elsewhere, there's so many places we could make cuts from before we get to space exploration and space settlement. So the two don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Fascinating. I'm going to open this up to questions.
My first question is, how did you collaborate your students into a particular learning point, number one, and how you communicate with them? Number one. Number two, in our real classroom situation, we have different levels of students. There are accelerate students, there are general, there are modified, there are focused students. How did you level them? Because you are getting a whole bunch of students as an online, your customers. So how did you filter them? How did you prepare the assessment task to meet the needs of each category of the people?
The question is, how did we communicate and bring them together?
Collaboration and communication because in our real classroom situation, they are sitting in a group, they are thinking, they are mind mapping, or they are doing Canva mind mapping, and they are creating kind of paragraph writing like point, explain, expand, link, whatever. But that's not possible in online situation because you are focused on one or two or three at a time. But I just wanted to know how you manage that.
Yeah, so starting with the first question, it's absolutely possible. I think we've been fortunate to be working on what we're working on in an era where there are so many Web 2.0 tools to facilitate online collaboration and online group learning. So for example, in our sessions, we often use Miro as a digital whiteboard. All our sessions have like tons of mind maps and collaborations and annotations and activities. There are even tools like Genially where you can set up virtual learning escape rooms. So we do gamified challenges sometimes in the sessions where they're trying to solve different problems to get out of the escape room in groups. Obviously, everyone knows of tools like Padlet and Mentimeter, and there's even more advanced virtual reality tools now. So it's absolutely possible. I think it needs to happen from an instructional design perspective. The way you design for online is inherently different. And I think that's part of the challenge that schools faced during COVID is most schools tried to just move what they were doing in person online. Whereas to do instructional design for online learning really well, you have to fundamentally design it very differently. So that's really the main tools that we use to bring them together. There's also been a lot of training we've had to do with the young minds on collaboration effectively. So we use Slack as a communication platform, learning what the best practice is with written communication online, best practices on forming teams, delegating tasks, doing project management. So these are all skills that we've regularly been teaching them. With your second question around the mixed abilities and how we level them, so our 9th and 10th graders are together and our 11th and 12th graders are together, foundational and advanced. And within that, obviously, you still have mixed age groups. Because we follow a mastery-based approach to learning, you basically, yes, there is a cohort-based element of the challenges. The units are self-paced. So that allows learners to pace it in a way that works best for them. So you naturally build that differentiation into the model where some learners might accelerate through some aspects of the curriculum and some might need more time with it. And that's just by nature welcome. You don't have to create pathways for gifted learners or pathways for learners that are taking their time. And we're hoping to launch a middle school next year as well for ages 11 and 12 too. So that will create another level. In terms of the part of the question on how we filter them into the school. So we do look for generally a minimum like 8th grade completion in the core literacies. And if they're coming from a homeschooling environment, we have assessments in place to be able to evaluate that. And we sometimes make exceptions if they haven't met some of the math requirements because of a learning difference and they have a math tutor that's filling that gap. So, we're very flexible. But the main thing we're looking for in our learners is an understanding of the model because it's so unique. It's very important that as a family, they understand what they're signing up for. And secondly, curiosity. It's very difficult. Even, that doesn't mean you have to be gifted. That doesn't mean you have to be self-independent. It's just very difficult to do this kind of learning model without some willingness to learn, some enthusiasm for learning. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the question because in a real classroom situation, for example, a student who is dyslexic, you create your assessments in a dyslexic font in a text size of 13 or 14, so he can do better. So like that, the students who have motor, neuro, immunal stuff, or any other ADHD or anything, in real situation, the teacher can prepare and modify according to the needs of the students. So that is one of the questions which I wanted to know. Thank you for your wonderful answer for question 1. Question 2 still is a little bit vague because I know that there are limitations for online one. Thank you very much.
Hi. What about our kids who are in mainstream schools but they want to be associated with Project Humanity on project basis? Is that an option? Because you want to give our kids also this blended approach to raise creative thinkers, as you're saying.
On a summer school, that's 6 weeks. It's like a compressed version of what we're doing. Obviously, it doesn't go to the same level of mastery and depth, but it allows learners to learn through challenges, mentorship. So that's something we've been doing every year. We've also increasingly been partnering with schools. So we're currently partnered with the Alpha Team Education Foundation. So we do a program where we take some elements of our curriculum and run it for 32 of their students every year. And we're launching a similar partnership with another school in Dubai. That similar question that was raised, like how can we bring in elements of this and incorporate it into the curriculum? And I do think there's a space for that. I think the best ways traditional schools can innovate is creating space and time in the schedule, even if it's an hour a week or 2 hours a week for some of the gaps that are not. And I think for the learners that do get to participate, they say it's such a nice break from school that's still learning. They're often shocked that there are no exams and they learn so much. And so they really enjoyed it. And a lot of the ones, especially with the partner organization I mentioned, come back every year for the program because they really, they get a lot of value from it, and it fulfills a gap for them. Yeah. So naturally it happens in any learner's journey where they either do an assessment or within a term they don't hit the goals that they wish. I think that's a kind of big existential debate in education around, do you hold learners back or do you then push them forward? What we've done is, I don't want to use the word holding them back, but give them the opportunity to try again, either by more scaffolding. Learners can also choose to evidence through different kinds of projects. And they also get a lot of freedom on the areas they want to master in. So our curriculum is split into 8 components, including discovery, flourishing, quantitative skills, creativity, thought, and so on. Within each literacy, there's a certain number of skills or credits they need to master, but they get to choose which credits or skills. So under creativity, there's the option of creative expression, literary analysis, product building, futures thinking, and in another area, they can choose which 2 they want to focus on. So that's often the case, is then we try to kind of like pivot or give it more time. I think one thing that needs to change in the system is the mindset around time. We assume all learners will get to a certain point at a certain pace. I wish some parents would accept that maybe their child needs 5 years of high school, not 4. Some learners do it in 3, and I think that's just something we have to stay more flexible around. So we do have learners who came into the school with, we had life circumstances that were causing severe stress and anxiety. They weren't ready to necessarily master at the same pace, and actually had really supportive parents who said, you know what, we'll take 5 to 6 years to hit the goals, and that was what's best for them. So I think that's what I would advocate for, rather than pushing them forward when they have foundational gaps that will then cause issues later down the line. So we're an American online high school. Our Dubai entity is a KHDA training institute. So when we partner with schools and do summer schools here, it's KHDA certified. We have been increasingly having more conversations with KHDA. I think especially the new administration is very supportive of progressive schooling, and they definitely want to position Dubai as a pioneer in this space. So yeah, no significant updates to share at this point in time, but I'm noticing shifts here. Yeah.
So I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you very much. I think it's just inspiring to hear about the progression of education and how it's so important to be thinking about it. And I'm coming at it also from just, what the discussion has taken, the discussion around compensation, accommodations for children who, do have those gaps coming in. I work with a lot of children with varying needs, and when they haven't been able to process information throughout the years till high school, they are coming in with significant gaps in their learning, in their content learning. So how do you accommodate for that? And if you do have a child with dyslexia, or is unable to read, or somebody who might even be blind. I just watched that movie Shrikant. I don't know, it's an Indian movie. I don't usually watch Indian movies, but it's very good. And it's based on a true story about this kid who was born blind and how he ended up at MIT. And the first time he, sat down in the class at MIT, they put a book in front of him that was translated into Braille, and it was so cool. So how is it that you are accommodating for these varied needs? And maybe you've already answered that, but really getting into the specifics of it.
Yeah, so about 30% of our learners have a special learning difference. As you can imagine, we do get a lot of interest from families. That's a segment of the population that has been greatly underserved by traditional schools. And right from a founding team level, we had a head of learning and inclusion who came from that background, so we were able to design it from the get-go with certain accommodations baked into the model. So to get into specifics, I don't believe there's one model of schooling that can cater to all special learning differences. So we've been quite explicit that there are some differences, especially being online, that we can cater to, and there's some that maybe we can't, and it's been a journey figuring out what works and what doesn't. With things like dyslexia, we've been able to cater to quite well. By nature of being online first, we're able to actually standardize things like fonts, text-to-speech on our platforms, offering flexibility to listen to audiobooks rather than just rely on reading, as well as even things like ADHD, because they're only in 3 hours of sessions a day and they can structure the rest of their time in what works best for them. Learners have more flexibility to optimize for their attention spans and processing times outside of that. We also have flourishing facilitators that do one-on-ones with all of our SLD learners every week to support them with coaching on executive functioning skills, time management, as well as get feedback back into our model to see what's not working with the system.
And that's done that's done virtually. Yeah, you don't have local partners.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. As I mentioned earlier, we've had learners coming in with things like autism on the autism spectrum that thrive online, that they would struggle with the stimulus of being in a physical school. So, these are just some examples of specifics, but there have also been cases that we haven't been able to cater to, either by nature of it being severe to the point where it's a safeguarding issue if we're not physically there with the child. So in those cases where it's a severe mental disorder or something we just cannot be able to moderate online, we've had to kind of turn away families in those cases, because there are situations where the child should be in a physical environment with physical supervision and coaching. It's very much an ongoing journey. We're constantly evaluating which of our SLD learners are thriving, which of them we're realizing maybe we can't serve best in our context. Ultimately, I think every human should have options of different educational systems to choose from to cater to their needs. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And they collaborate or communicate. And they find out the figures of numbers or data and statistics from various sources. And they are providing all the information as a teacher or as a provider to you. How did you validate their information? How did you validate the authenticity? How did you validate their perspectives and skills, what they are providing to you?
Can you clarify the second part of the question? I understood the first part, yeah.
Very project-based learning, there is a validation at the end.
Right, yeah.
How did you validate your online students?
Gotcha. So in terms of the types of projects, it's actually a very fun variety. We've had so many different kinds of mediums and modalities, everything from case study style projects to interview style projects, to presentations, to obviously still do the essays and solution briefs, investigations, research style projects, group projects, individual projects. There's such a rich modality, and often we look into the real world and we say, okay, if there's a certain types of skills that we're looking for, how can we then look at what real world applications of that would be? So for example, for one of our advanced physics units, there was a module where the learning designer essentially designed a project where they have to do a grant application for earthquake-proof buildings. And throughout doing that grant application, that mock grant application, they have to apply concepts from physics to justify the solution that they're doing the grant application for, and they had to bring in a bit of financial literacy. So that's just one example, but there's dozens. Now, to your question of how do you validate the skills and whether they're applying it, to be honest, we don't rely on just one project. So for every credit area, they form a range of artifacts to evidence the credits. So like most mastery-based models or standard-based models, we have, let's say, a scale. Let's go back to systems thinking. Systems thinking is then broken down in a set of learning outcomes that would show that a learner has the skill. So if they have systems thinking, what are they able to do? What are they able to show? And so all the projects are then linked to those kinds of outcomes. So when we're doing the rubrics, we look for certain things in their work and use that to essentially validate whether they've attained the skill or not. I don't think this is particularly groundbreaking. It's the same question you would ask in the workforce. If someone submits a piece of work, how do you validate whether it's met the design standards or the thinking standards or the writing standards? It's really the same fundamental question, just in a different format.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. In a real classroom situation, like for example, the students are learning about the medieval Black Death, okay, and they are taking information, gathering information, researching when that happened, when it is spread, what are the consequences of that, what are the political, legal, economic, social impact, and they are also looking at the recent one, COVID-19, okay? And in a validation point of view, the students will ask, okay, how did you compare? What are the similarities and differences between medieval Black Death and COVID-19. So that is purely coming from their mind, okay, based on their research. They are not looking at anything, okay, what they have learned, what they have researched. That kind of validation is possible in real classroom situation. But what you said, it is right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand what you mean by validation. Could you clarify the question?
Like end of every project-based learning, there is a validation. That means testing how they learned it.
Right, like a reflection?
Yes. It can be in any format, comparison and similarities, or cost and benefits, or anything. So it is possible in classroom situation.
When it's absolutely possible online, there's no reason it wouldn't be. We do, in the challenges I mentioned, at the end they do a challenge report reflecting on their solution and the journey, and applying metacognition to go through, okay, how did my skills evolve and change? And there's no reason why the metacognition, the Socratic questioning that the educators would play, or even the frameworks for analyzing the impact of a project wouldn't be applied in the online context. We use a combination of Slack, Zoom, and we have our own learning platforms as well. We've tried a few others. For example, we do some of them because learners also receive mentorship from industry experts. We do the mentorship sessions on Cosmos. It's like a 2D virtual reality platform where they can move between different spaces. And so, yeah, there's a range of platforms where we bring them together. Yes, so we have a core team as well as an extended team, of course, of educators. In our founding team is a mix of both education entrepreneurs and individuals that have started schools and have that pedigree as well. So our chief learning officer has led multiple online academies before, and our chief learning architect used to be at the IB as a kind of recognition lead. So he's come from the qualification background. One of our board members, Chris, in the US, he used to be the head of Harvard Innovation Lab, so comes from like the university academia background. And for our educators, we love working with a mix of obviously like traditional qualified teachers and educators that come from industry. So one of our best educators is a sustainability engineer. She came from directly from industry and just has a natural pedagogical aptitude to explain concepts and break them down, and her expertise combined with some of our educators that have been in the classroom for many years has shown us that this is an excellent model. Is like bringing in educators that have the teaching pedagogy and the industry expertise. And the team is completely global and we work fully remotely. We are a completely global team. We have a few members in UAE, but furthest west is in Chile and US, and furthest east is in Singapore and Philippines, and then there's everything in between as well.
How many kids right now at the School of Humanity?
Yeah, we're about to hit 80 full-time students. We started with 20, went up to 40 last year, and now we're up to 80. We do rolling admissions throughout the academic year, so we anticipate hitting 100 by the end of the academic year. What curriculum? We created our own. So that's part of the innovation, is we decided not to adopt any of the exam-based models. We created our own curriculum with, yes, we're still covering English, math, sciences to certain standards, but we brought in skills that are often not covered in traditional school curriculum straight into the core, rather than leaving them extracurricular. We do benchmark our curriculum to recognize qualification frameworks to ensure a certain level of rigor. The beauty of the flexibility is it looks different from learner to learner. I'll give you a few examples. So from our end, they have about 3 to 4 hours of workshops, 4 days a week. They're spread out throughout the day, of course, and they have self-paced learning to do in their own time. Just this week, I heard back from one of our learners whose family is nomadic. They travel around the world. So she's trekking through the Himalayas as she joins in sessions. That's the other misconception people have, is like you're just in front of a screen, but actually the flexibility gives you the opportunity to kind of connect more with the real world. Whereas our learners in Dubai who are part of T-Innovation might get together actually and join sessions and then co-learn and collaborate together on their projects. We have learners who are athletes who come to us because of the flexibility of the athlete model, who train for a few hours a day and then join sessions. So it really varies from learner to learner, and that's part of the beauty of it. It is, and we've had to get creative with our creativity curriculum because we're online and can't physically be with learners. So with the creativity part of the curriculum, there is a component of creative expression. In grade 9 and 10, it's very open-ended. It's learners choose their own creative expression practice, and all they have to do is develop a regular practice of it. So we have learners doing dance, learners painting, learners doing 3D animation, and so on. But in grade 11 and 12, we've brought a bit more structure. So we've partnered with FutureLearn to provide them with online courses on different mediums to continue to build their skills. They're getting matched with mentors on the creative expression and so on. And then the creativity part of the curriculum isn't just about arts. There's idea and product building, futures thinking, literary analysis, visual analysis. Those are all areas that are easier to do in an online context that are in the curriculum. The other thing we've had to get creative about is sports and activities. We do mandate that our learners have a regular practice of any form of physical activity. And many of our learners just kind of choose what fits them best. Some are in sports clubs, some just regularly run or go to the gym, and some are professional athletes. So again, it does take a bit more planning than if you were in a traditional school where you had to go to PE at certain fixed times. But I think, again, the families sometimes appreciate the fact that they get that independence. Yeah.
In the 11th and the 12th grade, at least in my son's school, PE is barely now once a week anyway.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much work to do.
I was just wondering, because I know that a lot of the high schools, universities in the U.S. are really looking at kids' community service for entry into a lot of the universities, which I'm glad that they're actually considering that, and also their jobs that they have throughout the high school years. What do you encourage community service from wherever your learners are living? Yeah, as part of the learning, I guess, required for your program.
So in the flourishing curriculum, because human flourishing isn't just about yourself, it's about your impact on others. Community service is one of the domains of the curriculum. And learners have flexibility on how they do this. Some learners will independently kind of find local charities and meet the credits. It's like 40 hours at least of community service. So in UAE, we've had learners do the mangroves planting to supporting laborers and a range of other things. But we try to also find partner organizations. So we recently partnered with a non-for-profit in US called Youth for Innocence, which is an innocence project. It's a kind of legal community service where they support lawyers who are trying to prove the innocence of people that have been wrongfully convicted. So a number of our learners have been supporting them and supporting with those cases. One part of the curriculum I didn't mention from an industry perspective is we do micro-internships every term. So at the end of every challenge, learners have an opportunity to work with a company. So the company gives them a professional assignment. They work on that assignment for 2 to 3 weeks and they present back to the company. And sometimes the organizations are not-for-profits. So they might be charitable organizations or mission-driven organizations that have a kind of societal cause, and our learners then get an opportunity to kind of work with them as well. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for Raya for being here. She's going to be around for a bit
I'll hang around.
You did want to ask for any questions, but in the interest of everyone's time, I need to wrap it up. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much for the questions. Thank you for having me.